our October Blue Trails Guide webinar. My name is Fe Augustin, and I'm the Colorado River Basin Associate Director with American Rivers. I'm really pleased that all of you are here to join us for our webinar today, Watershed Investment Success in Santa Fe, New Mexico. So a couple of quick things before we get into the meat of the webinar. As always, if your connection is lost, please log in using your unique web code and password that was provided to you when you registered with GoToWebinar. And then as always, this webinar is being recorded and it will be available next Thursday, November 2nd, for viewing at bluetrailsguide.org/blog. If you have any specific follow-up questions, please feel free to reach out to me directly. My email is on the screen in front of you. And then finally, this is a web-based platform, so be mindful that it might be a slight 3 to 5 second delay as we move from one slide to the next. So please be patient as we're going through the presentation. We will take about 5 minutes at the end for any questions that folks might have. You have a question box in your GoToWebinar side panel, which I encourage you to ask questions during the webinar or at the end, and we will save, again, about 5 minutes to go through those questions. And any of those questions that are not answered, we will go ahead and record and get answers to you after the webinar. So without further ado, I'm excited to move into the meat of our presentation today, Watershed Investment Success in Santa Fe, New Mexico. So our presenter is going to be Alan Hook, who is the Water Resource Coordinator Assistant with the City of Santa Fe Water Division. Alan received his bachelor's degree in environmental studies from Warren Wilson College in North Carolina, and has since then moved to Santa Fe, New Mexico. And he's been the project manager for the Santa Fe Municipal Watershed Management Program since 2013. He's worked for the City of Santa Fe for over 9 years within the Water Resources and Conservation section of the Water Division. As the Water Resources Coordinator Assistant, his role is to provide water resources with planning, project management, education, and outreach, as well as representation of the City of Santa Fe in partnership with the U.S. Forest Service in protecting the Santa Fe Municipal Watershed. Previously, Alan served as the environmental manager for the Pueblo of Nambe in New Mexico and assisted Nambe Pueblo with monitoring and mitigating the effects of the Molina Complex fire on the Rio Nambe. Prior to that work, he worked with the U.S. Forest Service Burn Area Emergency Response Team, performing hydrologic stream surveys and taking water samples after the Hayman Fire, Colorado's largest wildfire by area. Now, Alan serves on the technical advisory panel for the Nature Conservancy's Rio Grande Water Fund that is engaging private and public partners in protecting vital watersheds in northern New Mexico. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Alan Hook.
Good morning or afternoon to everyone, depending where you are. First, thank you, Faye, and to American Rivers and the Blue Trails Guide program for hosting this webinar, and for all of you being here today. My name again is Alan Hook, and I'm the Water Resource Coordinator Assistant for the City of Santa Fe's Water Division. And today I'd like to talk to you about the watershed investment success in Santa Fe, the capital city of New Mexico. And specifically, I'm going to present on the Santa Fe Municipal Watershed Program and the Santa Fe Living River. First, I want to talk about our 4 sources of supply for the Water Division's drinking water. Up here outlined is the Santa Fe River watershed itself. It's a tributary to the Rio Grande, which you'll see on the left side of your screen here. Moving back to the right, one of our source supply is the upper Santa Fe River itself. We have 2 reservoirs in the upper Santa Fe River watershed, also known to us as the Santa Fe Municipal Watershed. And then moving downstream, the blue dots are our storage tanks. These yellow dots are city wells, so we have a well field in the middle of the city of Santa Fe. Going to the north, we have what's called the Buckman Direct Diversion Project. So that is treating surface water off the Rio Grande, where we divert San Juan Chama project water. And then moving down, this purple asterisk is our wastewater treatment facility. And we actually utilize treated effluent to some of our contractors and then actually discharge some of that treated effluent along to the Santa Fe River. So wildfires in the Southwest. This map, again, the outline in blue is the Santa Fe River watershed. And this kind of shows the history of wildfires, some of the major, larger wildfires from 1970 through 2012. Wildfires and fire itself are pretty common in the Southwest. These forests around the mountains above Santa Fe and the Sangre de Cristos, and across the Rio Grande Basin into the Jemez Mountains, were naturally occurring and frequently experienced surface fires that thinned out many of the smaller trees, but seldom killed the larger mature pine trees, especially ponderosa pine, which is a fire-adapted species. Research shows that the ponderosa pine forests in this area historically contained more open park-like stands of primarily large ponderosa pine trees, averaging anywhere from 20 to 80 trees per acre. More recently, some of the causes of these larger wildfires are due to a history of fire suppression and also overgrown forests. So now we're starting to see more large-scale, destructive, high-severity fires. And this area, which is kind of in a fuchsia color, that was the Cerro Grande fire in 2000. And then following that, this larger purple area was the Las Conchas fire, which really had an impact on the Los Alamos community in the Jemez Mountains, but also in the awareness around the city of Santa Fe about wildfires themselves. So this next slide is moving back to the east above the city of Santa Fe. This is known as the Upper Santa Fe River Watershed, or also we know it as the Santa Fe Municipal Watershed. This watershed was closed in 1932 by order of the Secretary of Agriculture. This area itself is 17,384 acres, and the majority of the lands, most of the land you see shaded in green, is administered by the U.S. Forest Service through the Santa Fe National Forests. And then these areas here are mostly owned by the city of Santa Fe around our two reservoirs. The upstream reservoir is McClure Reservoir. Downstream is Nichols Reservoir. These two reservoirs provide up to 40% of Santa Fe's total municipal drinking water supply. One thing to note, this area, the likelihood of lightning-caused wildfire within this municipal watershed is 1 in 5 in any given year. So we are quite aware of wildfires, especially the potential of a lightning strike wildfire. So in the year 2009, recognizing the threat of wildfire to this critical water supply, a collaborative partnership drafted the Santa Fe Municipal Watershed Investment Plan, which was later amended in 2013 as the Santa Fe Municipal Watershed Plan. So the collaborative partners are here, the City of Santa Fe, also the Forest Service, a local nonprofit known as the Santa Fe Watershed Association, and then also the national nonprofit, the Nature Conservancy. And I'll discuss shortly the 4 main components of the plan. But the City of Santa Fe dedicated to contributing $5.1 million over 20 years, beginning in 2010 through 2029, to be paid for by our water utility customers, because they are, as all of we are in the City of Santa Fe, direct beneficiaries of a healthy watershed. So in 2011, and this is a significant slide here in some of the results, the Nature Conservancy led a public opinion survey done by a company called Fairbank, Moslin, Mullen, Metz and Associates. That's a mouthful. But they conducted opinion research survey, and after voters were informed of that potential threat of a major forest fire to the city's water supply, slightly more than 3/4 or 76% expressed support for a fund. A lot of people, they didn't initially sort of like the idea of a watershed protection fund, but they thought the term water source protection fund would be a good idea. 2/3 of those people that were surveyed said they were willing to pay an average of 65 cents per month to support the fund, and a majority were willing to pay up to $2 per month on their water utility bill. Other good news for the water utility we received was about 85%, or nearly 9 in 10 Santa Fe residents and voters believe the water division was doing a good job of providing residents with a reliable water supply. So the 4 components of the plan, starting on the top right here, was water management. So that's really where the water utility steps in, and this is really looking at both water quality and quantity. So getting that benefit from a healthy forest of still getting our cheapest and cleanest source of supply into our reservoirs. The next part is to the lower right, so that's the vegetation management and fire use part of the plan, which is primarily administrated through the Forest Service. So that's really the thinning of the forest around the municipal watershed, and also piling of vegetation, burning that has occurred throughout this lower non-wilderness part of the watershed. Public awareness and outreach, this has been a big collaboration with the Santa Fe Watershed Association. They've provided education and courses, or classes really, for elementary kids to get out, 4th and 5th graders, to really see where their water comes from, learn about water quality, some of the fire ecology, and it's a really great learning experience for them to get out of the classroom and learn about where their water source comes from. We also have some field trips for the public to actually get into a closed watershed, and also again have that experience of seeing where their water comes from. And then the last component was a major contribution from the Nature Conservancy, and again that was the idea of the payment for ecosystem services for the city and all our constituents to actually receive the benefit through that payment of the water utility fund. So in this slide, I just wanted to talk about the lower part of the Santa Fe Municipal Watershed. So that's comprised of about 7,270 acres of that 17,000 acre watershed, the municipal watershed. So we have thinned over 6,000 acres, we being the collaboration. Mainly it's utilizing Forest Service personnel, and sometimes city personnel or other agencies have assisted. And expenditures and the cost of the thinning. So this is based on 2010 to 2014 numbers. Pretty much putting broadcast burning in, it costs about $60 average per acre. And then prescribed pile burning, so that's where they cut and thin the forest, and then they pile it up, let it cure, and then burn. That's actually quite a bit more, so that costs $500 average per acre. And then doing the initial treatments going into the watershed, again, that's about $500 per acre. So you can see broadcast burning, whether it's with hand torches or going in and doing, for example, this picture where they bring in a helicopter and sort of do an aerial ignition and let fire burn through the forest floor, sort of mimicking a lightning strike fire. But again, it's a low intensity fire that's moving slowly through the landscape. One of the things I also wanted to note for comparison, in June of 2016, we actually had a small 7.9 acre fire. It was called the McClure Wildfire because it was above McClure Reservoir. So that actually was a lightning strike fire, and that cost about $39,000 per acre to suppress. So that's the comparative cost of doing fuels management as compared to having to put out an actual wildfire. So in this slide, this is the actual tool that the city and the U.S. Forest Service implemented for the financial management. This is called a cost share agreement. So this was initiated in 2015. It's a 4-year 50-50 cost share agreement, and each party is dedicated from 2015 through 2019 to spend $60,000 per year towards the vegetative management of the plan. We put in some goals under this cost share agreement. So the Forest Service each year looks at thinning and piling vegetation on 20 acres. Another 20 acres would be prescribed burn piles where they stack up the vegetation, burn it. And then also their goal is about 850 acres of prescribed broadcast burning. In addition, if it's possible, they're looking at possibly spending about 20% of the funding under this contract to maybe go into the wilderness area, which has not been done before, to actually introduce fire and again mimic natural fire in the process to sort of thin out not just the ponderosa pine dominant forests, but also some of the mixed conifer in the upper part of the watershed. And one of the main things I want to emphasize on that cost share agreement, why that really matters as a tool, is the timing. So for the Forest Service, a lot of times they get congressional funding. Their year starts October 1st. They have a lot of funds coming into the winter. They do a lot of planning. Maybe they can get projects done in the spring. But with fire suppression, and as we've all seen recently with fires out in the West, in Montana and Washington and Oregon, the fire suppression and the need for those funds can pull away from the fuels treatment funds, and they've already expended their money by the end of the summer. Come late summer, let's say September and October, this time of year, they'd like to continue to do treatments, but they don't have the money. So that's really where the funding from the city comes in, and they can do treatments during this time of year, especially when there's good moisture on the ground, airflow is moving away from the watershed in the city, and they can get continuity and continuation of this project and our needs to the thin in the watershed. So on this slide, I'm talking about source water protection. So again, I want to emphasize within the municipal watershed, there's a likelihood of a wildfire occurring 1 in any 5 of a given year. So this picture here was actually from that post-Las Conchas fire. This is one of the rivers and streams below that was impacted by ash. And we estimated the cost to dredge and haul possibly 2,000 acre-feet of sediment and ash from the city's reservoirs would cost between $80 million up to $240 million. So that's about half the storage capacity of our municipal watershed. So the other facet to take into account is both our municipal reservoirs are classified as high hazard potential earthen embankment dams, and they are not rated for flood protection or prevention. That's a really key thing to recognize, because if there was a high severity or catastrophic fire in our watershed, and we had a lot of post-fire flooding, because these are very steep slopes with granitic soils, they can mobilize very quickly with a half-inch to a 1-inch rain event within an hour. We would have our reservoirs probably inundated, and they, again, are not rated for flood protection. So that would be a major concern for us post-fire. So this next slide, I sort of wanted to move downstream from talking about the upper Santa Fe municipal watershed and really focus on this area of the Santa Fe River, which is below Nichols Reservoir, and moving through the city. This is what we call the middle reach or the urban reach of the Santa Fe River, all the way down to the wastewater treatment plant. And as you can see here, we have several of our city wells throughout the city that is sort of a supplemental supply to our surface water supplies. So one of the awards that we always sort of think about on the Santa Fe River is in 2007, American Rivers named the Santa Fe River the most endangered river. And this was following a number of years of drought around Santa Fe, but as you could see, this is pretty much a dry channel. So after 2007, 2012, the city decided to pass what was called the Santa Fe River Target Flow Ordinance for Living River. The idea of this was to allow up to 1,000 acre feet to flow past the reservoirs through the middle Santa Fe River channel. And I think I mentioned before that the Santa Fe River provides the city 40% of its total municipal drinking water supply, but I'd also like to mention the Santa Fe River yields anywhere from 4,600 to 4,900 acre feet of stream flow annually. So, you know, that means we would be bypassing about a fifth of our surface water supply to continue to have flow through the middle of the Santa Fe River channel. The goals of the Santa Fe River, which is commonly known around Santa Fe as the Living River Ordinance, was to create an ecologically healthy vegetative corridor. It was also to benefit the entire community with living river flows. So really moving those flows out of the upper Santa Fe River watershed all the way down through the middle section down to the wastewater treatment facility. Because the wastewater treatment plant does discharge about 4,000 acre feet per year below that to the lower Santa Fe River channel. Third goal was nurture a beautiful natural urban green space with water in an arid environment. And then finally, to provide an educational resource for schools and steward the resource for the community. So I included this picture of the Santa Fe River, and this is flowing out of the upper watershed areas in 1926, because it was kind of to emphasize, you know, Santa Fe River was never historically a perennial stream system. It's been more of an ephemeral river that depends on snowpack and storm flows to determine the duration of stream flow through the city itself. This picture again was taken in 1926, and this was when the first of the two reservoirs, McClure, was to be constructed. So how do we get the Living River target flows downstream past our reservoirs? So this is sort of the guideline on the hydrograph of how this is achieved. And on the bottom horizontal, you can see the months of the year. So the Living River hydrograph year begins in April. Part of that is because we utilize Natural Resource Conservation Services stream flow yield forecasts in both March and April to sort of determine what kind of yield we'll get out of the Santa Fe River into the middle section. On the vertical, you actually have the daily target flows in cubic feet per second. So the dotted line is pretty much the inflows above our reservoirs coming out of the municipal watershed. You can see the spring snowpack runoff in April, May, June, July, and then it really starts to drop off mid-July before the monsoons come again. And so those are the spring rains, and then the flow starts to drop out. So the target hydrograph looks at 1,000 acre feet, and this is sort of the budget of that 1,000 acre feet. And again, the spring pulse is sort of the peak, mimicking on a minuscule level, but at least mimicking snowpack runoff. And 9 CFS was chosen because that was about the rate that you could move water from below Nichols Reservoir all the way to the wastewater treatment plant and join up some of that treated effluent discharge. The second idea was also to create a summer pulse to wet the vegetation before we started to really drop out during the summer months. Another facet to recognize here is one of the rules of bypass flows is that we cannot have more flow coming out of the reservoirs than is actually coming in above McClure. Otherwise, we would be releasing flows from our storage permit of the reservoirs. So I included this slide just to sort of give an idea of last year, 2016 through 17. So we started in April of 2016. What actually happens and how do we implement the Living River hydrograph? So again, based on the NRCS streamflow forecast, if an average year and we had an average snowpack in the mountains, we would allow 1,000 acre feet to bypass. Well, the actual forecast said, well, we're at 74% of our snowpack and the snow water equivalent, so that 74% is projected to be the Santa Fe River streamflow yield. So instead, we multiply that 74% by 1,000 acre feet to then budget out 740 acre feet of target flows. You can see here the blue line is the actual inflows above our reservoirs. This background blue hatched area was 700 acre feet budgeted out over the year. The light blue shaded area was what we had planned to do. And then the orange line is the actual flows that came down below Nat'l. So we have a staff gauge that we measure flows. And again, you can see here, while we had planned, so the plan said, well, we should release about 7 CFS. We sort of planned during that period of the spring of 2016 to do about 5 CFS. We actually, in reality, could only bypass about 3 because there was not enough inflow above the reservoirs to provide that. And again, another unique part of 2016 was that we had some construction going on in the streamflow channel, so we actually stopped some flows in September to October. So as you can see, really the purpose of the Living River flows are really to provide a base flow. This is not a roaring river. This is not like the Rio Grande. And you can see here on May 5th of 2016, we did some stream flow monitoring, and it's probably 6 to 7 feet wide and about 1 foot deep where this staff person was taking measurements. And then next slide shows about mid part of the city on July 8th, so it's really started to warm up. This is the end of flow measurement along the Santa Fe River. So this is where probably the Santa Fe River, at least on the surface, has ended. But as you can see in the vegetation on both sides, we've actually increased the amount of the riparian areas of both cottonwoods and willows along the way, which was part of the goal of the Santa Fe Living River. So I also wanted to recognize sort of our parallel staff. So the Water Division is under the Public Utilities Department, but there's also the Public Works Department and the streets and drainage. But we have had previous and presently our River Watershed Coordinator who's worked on a lot of stream flow channel improvements. This was one of the projects, and as you see, there's grade controls here. Part of this idea is to actually create aggradation so that we're not losing more of the stream flow channel and the channel bed and creating more incision. So this was in 2012, and the next slide you could see in the same area a year later, this is some of the Living River flows. Some of the planted vegetation is really picking up. And now, almost a decade after the endangered listing of the Santa Fe River, we're starting to see a lot more improvements. Here's another one. Again, Public Works had some bonding to provide the Santa Fe River Trail improvements. So this is a trail running along the Santa Fe River. And this goes from downtown all the way to the city limits, and it's soon to be connected into Santa Fe County. So this was really doing bank improvements, lowering the grade from being an incised channel, and then adding this nice walking and biking path. And that's the same area, and about 18 months later in 2013 with some of the plantings really taking hold, and you can see there's still seepage flows in the Santa Fe River channel. So I wanted to emphasize on the improvements in the watershed successes and investments around Santa Fe, because this picture itself shows the city of Santa Fe all the way back in 1882, and as you can see here, this community really grew up around the Santa Fe River. So looking back at that 2007 award of the most endangered river, it seems tragic to have let the Santa Fe River go, and it was a major investment for the community to say we would be willing to bypass up to 1,000 acre-feet of in-stream flow through the city itself. But it was important enough for the community to invest in that, and the governing body actually supported it unanimously. Also, just the investment into the Santa Fe Municipal Watershed also is an investment besides, gray infrastructure of tanks, pipes, meters, and valves, that we're investing into the health of the forest, because again, it is our cheapest water supply, but it's also our cleanest. So it is something that we feel continuing forward, keeping a healthy watershed is a valuable investment in Santa Fe. So with that, Fe and others, thank you for listening to today's presentation, and I will turn it over, and I stand for any questions, and my contact information is at the bottom of the slide. And thank you again for your time today.
Thank you so much, Alan, for that really great presentation about the excellent work that's happening in and along the Santa Fe River in Santa Fe. So we are a couple minutes behind, but I wanted to leave time for just a few questions if folks have them. We have a couple that have populated on the screen, but if you have additional questions at this point, please feel free to go ahead again and type them in the question box on your GoToWebinar side panel, and we will answer a couple of those before we sign off. And then as a reminder, we will provide a transcript of questions and answers after the webinar has been completed. So Ellen, one of the questions that came up was, how did the Rio Grande Collaborative get started with the Nature Conservancy?
The Rio Grande Collaborative or the Santa Fe Collaborative? Because right now there's presently a Rio Grande Water Fund, which is a larger sort of collaborative on the Rio Grande watershed itself, and so that is a collaborative program that they've really picked up based on that, again, idea of payment for ecosystem services. So the city of Santa Fe is also a member of the Rio Grande Water Fund. But part of the collaborative and how it started was really, there was a collaborative forest restoration program. So that's a U.S. Forest Service funded program. And it was actually our local nonprofit, the Santa Fe Watershed Association, that got the grant funding. So they reached out to both the city, the Forest Service, and the Nature Conservancy to bring this collaborative program, given they had that funding. And then a key person was Laura McCarthy from the Nature Conservancy here in our local TNC office. She brought the idea of the payment for ecosystem services model forward, and that really integrated how to pay for this program going into the future.
That's great. Thank you, Alan. Another question that we have, a little bit different, is surrounding recreation. And so this question asks, is recreation allowed both along trails kind of in the upper watershed area near the reservoir, similar to how the pictures that you showed along the reaches of the lower river where you're building new trails?
So that is a good question. The municipal watershed is actually closed watershed, so there's no recreational activities like hiking or biking or horseback riding. There's no fishing allowed or hunting. However, around the municipal watershed, the city of Santa Fe, in collaboration with the Forest Service, a number of nonprofits, have created a mountain bike and hiking trail system, which are commonly known as the Dale Ball Trail System. And then above, at the very top of the municipal watershed, is actually the Santa Fe Ski Basin. So that actually overlooks and looks into the municipal watershed. So Santa Fe is a pretty active city, and there's a lot of recreational uses, but But right now, the municipal watershed itself still remains closed to those kind of activities. And it's for us in the city, it's primarily for water supply purpose.
Yep, great, thank you. One last question before we sign off today. When you were discussing the prescribed burns that you do in the various, in the watershed to kind of help mitigate against new wildfire, how do you determine or how do you prioritize the areas that you will do the prescribed burns on?
That's a good question. It's probably beyond my reach, but I could find the information for that. So right now, a lot of the areas that are treated are primarily in the lower part of the municipal watershed, so around where the reservoirs are. And so for a long time, I think it's been over almost a couple decades now, that expertise is left up to the Forest Service and the field specialists, and also some of the forest ecologists. But you know, there's been a series of efforts to first get first entry. So doing the initial cutting and thinning, bringing the number of trees per acre down, because we had, you know, sometimes up to 1,000 trees per acre, whereas a lot of the studies showed historically there were about 20 to 50 trees per acre. And then after that, they really look at, you know, once they've thinned, introducing broadcast burning to allow fire to be thinning out the forest floor and the actual treatment areas. So there's usually initial treatments and then a secondary treatment in those areas, and those are typically anywhere from 4 to 7 years apart, that they'll do multiple treatments within an area. We had probably our largest treatment in the fall of 2016, which is about 2,400 acres. But sometimes it's as small as about 100 to 150 acres. It really depends on the slope and aspect, and the purpose of what the Forest Service staff is trying to achieve, because there's a lot of variance in this watershed on steep slopes, south-facing vegetation or south-facing slopes versus north-facing. So it really depends on where they're trying to treat and what they're trying to achieve in their conditions. I hope that answers that.
I think that it does. Thank you so much, Alan. And thank you to all of you who participated in our October webinar this month. As a reminder, it was recorded, and so we will have it available on the Blue Trails Guide website at bluetrailsguide.org/blog starting next Thursday, November 2nd, if not before. So stay tuned for that, and we'll share it via email as well. Thank you again, Alan, for your amazing presentation. Feel free to reach out to him if you have any additional questions. Otherwise, we look forward to having each and every one of you back next month for our November webinar, Tuesday, November 14th, as we dive in a little bit more around the idea of communications, storytelling, and how you can utilize that to boost financial support from your members and constituents. So thank you guys again, and enjoy the rest of your Tuesday, and we'll see you back next month.